So I bought a 2006 Ford F-150 XLT, four-wheel drive, 5.4 liter V8 engine. I bought this just recently, a couple weeks ago, and whenever I buy a car, I do all the maintenance that people may have ignored over time, one of those being spark plugs. So I didn't know about the issues with these spark plugs, and it was a nightmare to remove. 7 out of the 8 were perfect. They came out perfectly. The last one didn't. So I don't know how many people have experienced this, probably not a whole ton. This isn't the spark plug that I removed here, but in fact when I pulled out of cylinder 7, which is the third one back on the passenger side, I sheared off the nut portion of the spark plug. I know a lot of people have these things break apart. Maybe the bottom cone stays inside, or the threaded portion comes out and the electrode stays together. Well, mine was the worst that could have possibly happened, and the entire nut came off. There's that nut that came off of one of them. When that happened, it felt pretty terrible because I couldn't think of any way to get this thing out. So I ended up buying the Ford tool, thinking maybe I could use this. Maybe the puller could actually pull the electrode out. Maybe it's knocked loose and I could grab onto this portion, pull it out, despite the nut not being in there. From there I would maybe be able to use this easy out, and I had to buy these too. I bought a set of them, and this happened to be the right size. There's some information right there on the one that actually fits within. Well, what happened is I tried to pull it out with this tool, and of course, as I expected, because I actually shaped one of my other ones and put it in this vise over here to test, and I pulled this off, and when I did that, all that happened was the metal portion here pulled right out of the ceramic portion. So no good. That didn't do anything. I basically ended up pulling something like that out. So I was still left with the entire electrode and the entire spark plug except for the nut, because the nut was already removed. So I ended up breaking off the ceramic part. So this is what these look like when they're torn apart. You can see this little edge right here sticks out, and there's actually a chamfer on the inside of the nut. So it slides over this and it holds it in place at some portion. See how it kind of sets down on it. So I ended up breaking the ceramic piece off, and you can imagine I ended up with something like this, minus the nut. And the first day I tried to pull this thing out, I spent 9 hours trying to chip out the ceramic, trying to drill it out, doing all these different things, trying to get it out, and it felt pretty hopeless. After I went to bed that night, 1 a.m., woke up in the morning thinking, okay, I have an idea. What could I do? So I thought I would buy one of these chisel hammers, or whatever you want to call it. It was either I was going to tear this engine apart, or this was going to work, and I was hoping it would. So again, back to this piece minus the nut. I put this chisel hammer straight down, and you can actually use this guide if you'd like to avoid damaging anything that you don't want to damage, but that still actually works for this process because that fits right into that hole and keeps you pretty centered. So I sharpened to a point on the end by holding it in that clamp and then grinding it down. I stuck it into this tool, and it worked. It actually chipped out all the ceramic down to the cone. I was really concerned that I would chip too far. Once I did, I might push this piece into the cylinder, and then I checked this, and I checked this piece here, and it wasn't magnetic. So if it went down there, I'd probably be screwed, and I'd have to take apart the engine and pull the head off and do some extra crap, and I wasn't excited about that if I would have had to do that. But I was able to chip that out, with this little hammer. So eventually I ended up with basically this housing. This is the one without the nut on it, and it had this bottom cone still in place, and all the ceramic was removed all the way down to this cone, and within the cone I had that clear space on the top, and I didn't push this down into the cylinder. So I use this tool the way it's designed for, which is reverse threaded, and it actually goes down into that cone, and it pulled the cone out. Next, I got this this easy out. Make sure you use the square one. It's tapered down, and it has these sharp edges all around. Don't use the spiral cut one. But I stuck that down in there, and I hammered it in with a hammer. Put a 3/8 inch, actually I don't know what size that is, I think it's 3/8 inch 12-point socket. Not one of the 6-point sockets, those don't work, but the 12-point will fit on a square. Put it in, added my extensions, and I could not get this sucker out. It was seized in there. There's no way to get it out. Until I found a 4-foot length of pipe, and I put that on the end of my ratchet, and I cranked on it. Eventually this thing pulled out, didn't strip the threads. I had used I used some different chemicals that I dumped down there to try to loosen these up, loosen up the threads to get in between the thread and the cylinder head, and nothing worked. Nothing loosened it up, and I think eventually I basically got lucky that this thing came out without stripping the threads on the cylinder head. But it worked, and I think it would work on heads 1, 2, and 3, and 5, 6, and 7. If you're on 4 or 8, getting this this chisel in there, you're gonna have to find something special to get in there and actually chip out, because there is almost no space in the back to reach it. But the chisel worked. So if you ever break off the nut, if you ever break off the nut from a spark plug, I found that a pneumatic chisel would actually get all that ceramic out. The drill didn't work. I mean, you've got that metal center. Every time you chip some out, chip for a second or two, blow it out with compressed air, do it again, repeat until you get to where you want to be. And it's very difficult to actually see down the hole on the rear 2 cylinders on both the passenger and the driver's side. So do a lot of this blindly, and that tool right there will help you stay centered. Eventually I pulled that out once I had gone in a little bit on this thing into the ceramic, because you end up with a divot that just naturally your chisel drops into. But screwdriver won't work to chip it out. It's hard to get a hammer or anything like that down there. It's really just a big nightmare, but this thing saved my life. Got it on Amazon. Again, if you run into this issue, I would recommend buying this specific one because it works. EX25B 3/8 inch bolt. In the end, I had to buy this thing for 90 bucks. This is the 65 700 includes, I believe this is the only difference, that it has this puller. I could be wrong, there might be other parts. This was only 12 bucks at Harbor Freight. Make sure you get the one that's more compact than the other. I bought an air compressor. I've been meaning to anyway, but I ended up buying a very small air compressor, 3-gallon, low horsepower. I wish I would have bought a bigger one, but I didn't. I've got a ton of ratchets all mixed together, but I ended up buying one that had the 12-point you can see down there. That's what you need for the square, easy out shape. And I just want to start with something with a little bit of extra length to try to not strip. So this is the last part of this video. I had 3 other clips, that's why there were different sections of the video. I could only record 5 minutes at a time or different sizes of video, so I apologize for that. But really the summary is, if you shear off the nut from your spark plug, I think this is really this is applicable to any vehicle. I don't think it's just the Ford F-150 and this specific spark plug, but this should be usable for really if you ever have this issue. You're gonna have to take some risk. You're gonna have to choose and make a decision on if you're willing to take that risk. So I mean, using a chisel hammer in your engine, especially an aluminum head, you know, it's risky. You have to do it in short bursts. You have to be careful as you can be, and just accept that you might damage your engine. You might have to replace your cylinder head, but make that choice one way or the other. So basically, strip off that spark plug nut. You chisel out the ceramic. When you get deep enough, you use the Ford tool and the reverse threaded tool to pull this cone out. After that, you drive in, I bought this set because I didn't know what size to use, but this Williams tool here, and you drive that in with a hammer, and then you use your ratchet and any extensions that you need to get enough leverage to go ahead and pull this thing out. I wouldn't buy cheap tools. This set right here was more than 50 bucks. My guess is that if you just bought this one tool, it's probably 10 or 15 bucks. A lot of it you can buy on Amazon, but I wouldn't go with a cheap tool, because if you break that tool off inside your cylinder head, or while you're trying to remove it, it torques and cracks or breaks, you're pretty much screwed. So spend the money to do it. I ended up having to buy around 300 bucks in tools and parts that I didn't have previously. Even this cheap clamp I didn't have. This vise, bought this at Walmart, bought that at Harbor Freight. I bought that I think Amazon or eBay, probably Amazon. I bought that on Amazon. You can buy an air compressor at Harbor Freight or Walmart, or really wherever you want to buy it. I bought a new drill, so I had a battery powered drill. I bought an electric drill. That's another 20-25 bucks, so nothing too crazy. None of the solvents worked to loosen up the threads. I'd still try that, but it takes a lot, but it worked out. The truck fires right up, runs strong, no check engine lights or anything like that. The OE parts, I believe they're Motorcraft spark plugs. They're 60,000 mile spark plugs at a minimum, I believe, assuming your engine's running fine. But yeah, there you go. I hope this helps out. It's risky, but it worked for me. And after spending the 9 hours trying some other methods, I switched to this chisel hammer, and it took me 2 hours from the time I started that to the point of having the new spark plug in. Oh, one other thing I did, I didn't use metal, but I got these hard plastic brushes, nylon brushes, and I cut off the circular end and put it in a drill, and I ran those through the coils. You can run that through and clean up where the coils are at. Make sure you blast into the cylinder to blow out anything that may have fallen in. Be really careful not to drop any ceramic in there, because obviously a magnet's not going to pick that up. I also purchased a couple of these magnetic tools, right, extendable tools. I use this straw. I put this on the end of my air compressor blower nozzle, and I extended that down inside, and that worked really well. And yeah, I was kind of nervous about using a thread chaser. I didn't end up buying one of those. I looked at them, but I was concerned that if I used one of those, I might actually ruin the threads versus getting a new spark plug in there and just running it down and going by feel. And it ended up, I didn't have stripped threads. It went right in, tightened down. The torque settings are 22 to 27, I think is what I remember. On the other 7, I went right in the middle, went right around 25. And then on this one, I kept it at the low end, down at 22, because I didn't want to run into this issue again. And I did use anti-seize. So there you go. Hope it helps. Goodbye from Utah.